Thank you, Senator, for joining us. The health care ruling yesterday, you're very familiar with the Supreme Court having clerked with Samuel Alito. Do you think that the Supreme Court would uphold the ruling from Judge Vinsons in Florida yesterday?
Well, of course, we'd all like to know that. I think it is somewhat likely that that will be the ruling in the Supreme Court. I think Congress overstepped its authority under the Commerce Clause, and the district judge ruled correctly to that effect. And so, yeah, I think that is the most likely outcome at this point. But of course, it's very difficult to predict, as always. And I don't purport to speak for the Supreme Court or predict with 100% accuracy at this point what they're going to do.
Do you think, though, the sweeping nature of Judge Vinsons' ruling, not just overturning the individual mandate, but also overturning everything from closing the Medicare prescription drug donut hole to the ban on pre-existing conditions, really every line of that health care bill, is that going to make it more difficult for the Supreme Court to uphold that ruling?
Well, on the one hand, you have a desire on the Supreme Court to always address each case and resolve each case on usually the most narrow grounds possible. On the other hand, issues of severability have to be considered. And if there is no severability clause in the bill itself that they were addressing, then that's normally what would happen. If you find one provision unconstitutional, then unless it can be severed, which the judge yesterday found it could not, then the whole thing goes down in flames. In this case, we have something interesting because separate and apart from the severability issue, there are grave doubts as to whether or not President Obama's health care reform package can survive without the individual mandate provision. And so it may have that effect regardless of what the ruling on severability happens to be.
So you're saying because you basically, in order for the system to work, you'd have to have some sort of individual mandate for the pre-existing conditions to be covered for everyone.
That's right. That's right. And there, of course, there are other provisions that if the severability ruling turned out that way, could still pre-exist. But the structure itself, what was envisioned with the package, wouldn't survive.
On the political side, you have signed on, along with every Republican senator, to Senator DeMint's bill to repeal the health care bill. However, not being in charge of the Senate chamber, how are you guys going to actually force a vote on the measure?
Well, Senator McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, has promised that we're going to get to a vote on this issue. I've learned that when that man speaks with such certainty, he usually turns out to be right. He's almost always right when addressing such procedural issues. There are people in the Senate who have concerns with this bill, and I hope to get it to a vote and set the record about the fact that we as Americans don't want issues like this being crammed down our throats from Washington, D.C.
Moving on to the balanced budget amendment, you actually have introduced an amendment to the that would be an amendment to the Constitution that would require Congress to basically, Congress would not be allowed to spend more than it takes in any given year. What are the chances you think that that actually could pass the Senate?
Well, we got within one vote just about 13 years ago of passing out a balanced budget amendment by the requisite two-thirds margin. We got it out of the House by that margin. We got within one vote in the Senate of having that happen. I think the time has finally come for that to happen this year, as our national debt is now approaching $15 trillion. Americans in both political parties and independents are recognizing that this is unsustainable and that we have to have a balanced budget amendment. I'm optimistic about our chances of getting that done this year because the American people are demanding it.
Your colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham, though, said that he doesn't think it's achievable to get the two-thirds necessary, and then you also need three-quarters of the states to actually amend the Constitution. He wanted something that was more achievable. Is there any alternative that you could pursue that might actually be passed and that has a better shot at becoming law?
Well, first of all, getting it ratified by three-fourths of the states is not going to be a challenge, in my opinion. I think the states are ready and eager to have this happen from Washington, D.C. The difficult part, of course, is going to be getting it through the Senate. But again, we understand here that the American voting population overwhelmingly supports a balanced budget amendment. We think we can get it done. The reason I don't support alternatives that fall short of this kind of constitutional amendment have to do with the fact that in the past, when Congress has adopted such spending reform measures that are statutory rather than constitutional, Congress has found a way to simply exempt itself out of those. And that's basically what happened with the Graham-Rudman-Hollings measure back in the 1980s. Congress just exempted itself out and eventually repealed it. And we can't have that happen again, and that's why we need to put this in the Constitution.
The Congress is going to be faced next month with having to increase the debt limit. And you've said that you will filibuster that unless there is a vote on this balanced budget amendment. Why is that?
Well, I will resist any and all efforts to raise the national debt ceiling. The only way I would even consider not resisting allowing that to get to a vote would be if it were part of a package deal negotiated whereby the other party in the Senate agrees that, if you will allow us to get to a vote on the issue of raising the debt ceiling, we will first pass out a balanced budget amendment. That's the only way I'd even consider that.
Then you think it would actually be better for the United States to basically default on their loans?
No. Those who suggest that we have a choice between either raising the national debt ceiling or defaulting on our loans present a false dichotomy. This is not a binary choice we have here, and that's why I support Senator Pat Toomey's legislation. It would make sure that we don't default on them, that would say all revenue coming through the door would go first to satisfy our debt obligations in the event that the debt ceiling isn't raised. And that would keep us basically in perpetuity from defaulting on our obligations.
Senator, I have to ask you, there was a lot of political buzz yesterday when Jon Huntsman, the former Utah governor, announced his resignation or submitted his resignation to the Obama administration as the current ambassador to China. What do you think his chances are that he's running for president, and would you support him in 2012?
Well, Governor Huntsman's a good man, now Ambassador Huntsman, I should say. I used to work for him. I was his general counsel when he was governor in the state of Utah. He comes from a great family. I love him and all of his family. I think he's talented at every job he undertakes. I look forward to seeing what he'll do.
Do you think that it will hurt him that he's worked for the Obama administration? And again, I'm curious if you would be willing at this point to say that you'd support him in 2012.
Well, it's anyone's guess whether he will actually end up running against the president, who is currently his boss. I think it's premature for me to speculate about that at this point.
Great. One final question, Senator. The news of the day, obviously, is Egypt. Do you think that the president's response so far has been in line with what it should be? Do you think the administration is doing an okay job at handling this crisis?
I think the administration is doing the best job that it can, given information that it's got. This is a touchy situation, and I think we need to all hope and pray for a good outcome. We need to hope for an outcome that is favorable to the United States and favorable to the people of Egypt.
Great. Thank you, Senator, so much for your time.
Thank you.